The stars bled their last light across the void, their embers sinking into the black seas of eternity. Suns that had burned for 1 billion years now sputtered like dying candles, their flames gnawed hollow by the hunger of time. Over Fenris, the wolf world, the heavens seemed to lean low with a silence that pressed upon the heart like the weight of a tomb. And in that silence, the howl of a legion echoed, proud, feral, eternal. We who watch this tale must begin with reverence, for it is no light thing to speak of the rise and fall of heroes, nor the betrayals that shattered brotherhoods and empires alike. The tale before us is one of loyalty turned to ash, of a wolf torn between the call of his pack and the command of his master. It is the story of Leman Russ, the Wolf King, whose legend endures in both glory and sorrow. But before we begin, let me say this. We truly love and care for you, our listeners across this vast world. In these hours, when you choose to wander with us into the midst of forgotten ages, know that your presence matters. Before we step into the tale, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, grab your coffee, settle into the shadows, and let us begin. The galaxy was not yet old when the Imperium rose, but already it carried scars. Empires had flared and fallen, their ruins now scattered beneath the endless night. Humanity, fractured and preyed upon, had called out for deliverance, and the Emperor had answered. From the laboratories of forgotten science and the fires of his will, he had wrought his sons, the Primarchs. They were not merely generals nor kings, but living archetypes of mankind's greatest strengths and deadliest flaws. Among them, none were so wild, so untamed as Leman Russ. Born amidst the storms of Fenris, a world where winter devoured summer and sea devoured land, Russ was shaped by savagery. To survive on Fenris was to fight against death each day, and those who faltered became carrion for wolves and krakens. The boy who would become a Primarch was raised not by men, but by beasts, a child of snow, bone, and fang. It was said that the wolves themselves howled for him, and that in their howls lay both prophecy and doom. When the Emperor found him, he named him son, but the name alone could not tame him. Russ knelt in loyalty, yes, but it was the loyalty of a wolf, fierce, protective, yet always bristling at the leash. He loved his father, but he also feared what his dream might demand. For the Emperor's vision was vast, an empire without end, built upon unity and obedience, and Russ was unity's contradiction, a creature who embodied freedom, ferocity, and a loyalty that answered first to kin before crown. It was here, at the dawning of his service, that Russ's first conflict was born. He stood at the head of the Vulca Fenrica, the Space Wolves, his legion, warriors drawn from Fenrisian stock and shaped by the gene seed of their king. They were not the polished soldiers of Guilliman, nor the stoic machine warriors of Perturabo. They were a storm given flesh, a brotherhood of howls and sagas, their every battle fought with the fury of Fenris itself. They bled for Russ, and Russ bled for them. But the Imperium looked upon them with unease. To many, they were not an army, but a pack of beasts. Their savagery shamed the order of the Emperor's design. Behind closed doors, whispers rose. Could such a legion be trusted with the destiny of mankind? Russ heard those whispers. His wolves heard them too. And though they snarled in defiance, the seed of doubt began to fester. Yet it was not the hatred of others that weighed upon Russ most. It was the silence of his father. The Emperor, in his infinite wisdom, revealed little of his heart. To Russ, who lived by bond and oath, this silence was a wound. He longed for the warmth of kinship, but the Emperor gave only the cold of command. And so the Wolf King stood at a crossroads, to follow blindly as a weapon, or to question as a son. The galaxy darkened as the Great Crusade pressed onward. Stars fell to imperial banners. Alien dominions crumbled before the march of the legions. But behind every victory loomed shadows. Shadows of ambition, rivalry, and the unspoken fear that even the Primarchs were not immune to betrayal. Russ, ever loyal, fought not for empire, but for his father. Yet in his heart, a question gnawed. Was loyalty strength, or was it chains? In those days, his brothers sought him out. Horus, the favoured son, laughed with him around the fires of conquest, sharing cups of Fenrisian mead and tales of battles yet to come. Magnus, ever the seeker of hidden truths, warned him that obedience could blind. Rogel Dawn spoke of duty as iron, unyielding, unbending, and in each voice, Russ heard an echo of the choice he would one day face. He loved them, and yet he feared them. For beneath the bonds of brotherhood, he saw pride, ambition, and shadows of rebellion. He wondered which of them would one day break their oaths, and more hauntingly, whether he himself would be the one to do so. Thus begins the tale, not in the clash of armies, but in the silence before betrayal, a silence filled with howls, with doubt, with the unyielding pull of fate. Leman Russ, Wolf King, son of Fenris, stood upon the edge of his destiny, torn between loyalty to the Emperor and the wild truth of his own soul. And as the stars faded over Fenris, as wolves howled across the ice fields, the galaxy itself seemed to wait, for blood, for fire, for the fall that would come. The firelight flickered across the longhouse of the wolves, throwing shadows that danced like spirits upon the timbered walls. Outside, the storm raged across Fenris, sleet lashing the iron peaks and waves breaking themselves against the cliffs with the fury of gods forgotten. Within, the pack sat in silence, their yellow eyes fixed upon their king. Leman Russ sat at the high seat, the mead untouched in his hand. The voices of his warriors, once filled with boast and song, had dimmed into unease. They had fought and bled across 100 worlds, broken alien empires, and raised the banners of the Imperium upon shattered citadels. Yet no victory banished the whispers that followed them from system to system. Barbarians, beasts, the Emperor's hounds, fit only for blood and ruin. The wolves growled at such insults, but Russ knew words could wound deeper than any blade. He had seen the way Guilliman's men looked upon his legion, polished, proud, disgust in their eyes, as though they gazed upon mongrels. He had seen the guarded silence of Dawn, who valued order above all things, and most of all, he had seen the Emperor's own detachment, his golden visage impassive even as his wolves howled for recognition. Russ rose then, his voice like thunder over the storm. Brothers, my sons, hear me. They call us beasts, aye. They name us monsters. But what are we, if not the fangs that guard the throat of mankind? Let the polished legions scorn us. Let the scholars of terror sneer at us. We are Fenris. We are the storm, the fury, the howl in the night. And no empire, not even the Emperor's, shall strip that from us. The hall erupted with howls, fists pounding the tables. Yet beneath the roar of his sons, Russ's heart remained troubled. For even as he spoke of pride, the silence of his father gnawed at him still. It was in those days that Horus came to him. The War Master strode into the wolves' hall with laughter on his lips and the weight of destiny upon his shoulders. He clasped Russ's arm, his eyes alight with warmth. "Brother," he said, "your hall is colder than the void itself. Let me bring fire to it. And he did. That night the wolves feasted as though the storm itself bowed before them. Horus drank with Russ, arm in arm, their laughter shaking the rafters. He spoke of the glory of the Great Crusade, of the unity of brothers, of the dream that the Emperor had gifted them. Do you not see, Russ? We are his chosen, each of us a shard of his will. Together, we are unstoppable. Together, we will raise mankind to heights undreamed of. Russ wanted to believe. He wanted to silence the doubts that stalked him like wolves at his heels. In Horus's voice, there was conviction, warmth, even love. For a moment, Russ felt kinship, the bond he longed for in his father but never received. Yet as the night waned and Horus's laughter faded into the storm's howl, Russ wondered, did his brother's fire burn from love of mankind or from the hunger of ambition? Other brothers came in those days. Magnus, robed in crimson, his single eye gleaming with knowledge both wondrous and perilous. He spoke to Russ in quiet tones, away from the ears of the pack. You are loyal, Wolf King, but beware. Loyalty, when blind, becomes chains. Our Father keeps secrets from us, truths even we are not permitted to know. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself what kind of empire is built upon silence. Russ bristled. I ask not. My oath is my truth. Magnus smiled sadly, as though he gazed upon a child who had not yet tasted betrayal. Then may your oath not be the knife that pierces your heart. After Magnus came Dawn, iron-willed and unbending. He looked upon the wolves with cold eyes, speaking little, his voice hard as stone. To Russ, he said only this: order is the foundation of the Imperium. Your savagery undermines it. Tame your sons, or one day they will bring ruin. Russ answered with a growl. Better savagery than weakness. My sons may be wolves, but they will never break. And so, the voices of his brothers swirled around him. Horus's warmth, Magnus's warning, Dawn's disdain. Each spoke a truth, yet none gave Russ peace. He stood between them, a wolf torn by the pull of the pack and the command of the leash. It was then that his own sons began to question. Bjorn the Fell-Handed, his most faithful, asked him quietly, Father, do we fight for Fenris or for Terra? For the Emperor or for the pack? Russ's silence was answer enough. The campaigns pressed on. Worlds burned. Alien kings bent the knee or were cast into ash. The wolves carved sagas in blood and steel. Yet with every victory, Russ felt the distance between himself and his father grow. The Emperor no longer rode at their side, no longer fought among them. He had returned to Terra, to works cloaked in secrecy. Russ, left to lead, wondered what trust meant when trust was not returned. One night, as the fleet drifted between stars, Russ stood alone in the strategium. Before him hung the star maps of the galaxy, glowing with countless worlds. His reflection shimmered upon the glass, his face half in shadow. He thought of Fenris, of the wolves that raised him, of the ice that shaped him. He thought of the Emperor, distant, silent, unknowable, and he thought of himself, torn between two truths, the wolf who follows the pack and the son who obeys the father. In that silence, a thought came to him, unbidden. What if obedience leads to ruin? What if loyalty itself is betrayal? He pushed it aside, but it lingered, like a thorn beneath the skin. When dawn came, he led his legion once more to war. His howl shook the stars. His blade drank the blood of Xenos kings. To all the galaxy, he was the Emperor's wrath made flesh. Yet within him, the first cracks had formed. For loyalty was no longer simple. Love and doubt warred within him, and though he bled for the Imperium, he could not silence the question that haunted him. Was he the Emperor's son, or merely his hound? And as the fleets of the wolves howled into the void, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the day when that question would demand an answer. The void was endless, yet even in that black eternity, war left scars. Across the stars drifted the husks of worlds broken by the wolves' wrath. Burned citadels, shattered fleets, and the ashes of alien kings bore witness to Leman Russ's ferocity. Yet even amid such triumph, the silence between victory cries seemed louder than the howls of battle. On the bridge of the Hrafnkel, Russ stood alone, gazing into the abyss. His wolves had earned glory enough for 10 sagas, yet the weight of their deeds pressed heavy on his heart. He had raised empires only to topple them. He had carved oaths in blood, yet heard only silence in return from the throne upon Terra. It was then that Bjorn came to him again, loyal Bjorn, his first among sons. The young warrior's armor still bore the scars of the last war. The wolf pelts upon his shoulders matted with blood, both his own and his enemies. "Father," he said, kneeling before the Wolf King, "we have fought as you commanded. We have conquered as the Emperor willed, yet the other legions scorn us still. Tell me, are we truly his sons, or only his beasts?" Russ's jaw tightened. He wished to answer with certainty, to lift the burden from his son's heart. Yet the truth was a wound that had no balm. "We are both," he said at last. "Beasts when he wills it, sons when he remembers it. And that is the way of our fate." Bjorn's eyes burned with loyalty, but also with sorrow. "Then what of us, Father? If the Emperor forgets us, do we not cease to be his?" Russ had no answer, for even as his sons asked, he himself wondered. The campaign pressed on. The wolves were unleashed upon a world of silver seas and crystal towers, an empire of Xeno scholars who fought not with blades, but with words of peace. They came with treaties, not weapons. They bowed before the Imperium's might and begged to be spared. The other Primarchs would have scorned them, or perhaps bent them to service. Russ, bound by duty, brought only fire. His wolves descended upon their towers with storm and fang. The seas ran red, the towers crumbled. And when the last of the scholars knelt before him, their voices trembling as they asked why mercy was denied, Russ could only answer, "Because my father has commanded it." That night, as the world burned, Russ walked alone among the ashes. The air stank of blood and smoke. The corpses of those who had once sung songs of knowledge now lay broken at his feet. And he thought of Fenris, of how the wolves hunted not for cruelty, but for survival. Yet here, survival had not demanded slaughter. Only obedience had. He stared at his hands, still wet with the blood of innocence. And for the first time, he felt not the pride of the hunt, but the weight of guilt. It was then that Magnus found him. The crimson giant moved through the smoke like a shadow of prophecy, his single eye gleaming with pity. "Brother," he said softly, "is this what we are meant to be? Executioners, not builders. Hounds to do the Emperor's bidding, even when the prey does not resist?" Russ growled low in his throat. "Do not speak to me of pity. Magnus, you who weave sorcery and cloak yourself in secrets." Magnus did not flinch. "Secrets, perhaps, but not silence. I speak to you because I know what you feel. Even if you will not admit it, you question, you doubt, and that makes you more human than our father would allow." Russ's hand tightened upon the hilt of his blade. For a moment, he thought to silence his brother's words with steel. Yet in the depths of his heart, he knew Magnus spoke truth. Still, he snarled, my loyalty is unbroken. Doubt is a wolf at the door. I will not let it enter. Magnus's gaze did not waver. Then be wary, brother. For when wolves are caged too long, they turn upon their masters. With that, Magnus left him, his words lingering like smoke in Russ's mind. The days that followed only deepened the cracks in Russ's soul. His wolves grew restless, their howls no longer ringing with triumph, but with unease. They felt the scorn of other legions, the weight of the Imperium's disdain. Some whispered that they fought only for Fenris now, not terror. Others muttered that the Emperor had set them apart as outcasts by design. And in their murmurs, Russ heard his own doubts echoed back to him. It was Horus who came once more, the War Master, whose smile could set the coldest heart aflame. He spoke to Russ in the War Council, his voice warm, his presence commanding. Brother, you are the Emperor's most loyal son. Yet he does not honor you as he should. He sends you to kill but never to rule. He names you savage, even as you bleed for him. Tell me, does this seem just? Russ glared at him, torn between fury and agreement. It is not justice I seek. It is my oath. Horus placed a hand upon his shoulder, heavy as destiny. An oath to what? To silence? To chains? You are more than his hound, Russ. You are a king. Never forget that the word struck him like a blade. For in them lay both flattery and truth. And though Russ growled, he could not shake their weight. In the nights that followed, Russ dreamed. He dreamed of Fenris, of wolves howling beneath shattered moons. He dreamed of his father's face, cold and distant, his eyes empty of love. He dreamed of his brothers, their voices filled with laughter one moment and betrayal the next. And always he dreamed of blood. Blood upon his hands, blood upon his sons, blood that would not wash away. When he woke, he stood at the viewport of his flagship, staring into the endless void. And he asked himself the question he could no longer silence. If loyalty demands we kill what we love, then what is loyalty worth? The howl of the wolves answered him, rising from the decks below, a sound both proud and sorrowful. It was a sound that carried across the stars, a herald of the doom yet to come. The eternal librarium's vaults groaned as the cogitators hummed, ancient runes flickering across the chamber walls. In the silence, the tome continued to breathe its secrets into the archivist's mind. This chapter unfurled like a shadow, where myth blended with blood-soaked truth. The blood angels, though radiant in their glory, bore a flaw older than most dared to whisper. It was not merely a curse of rage, nor only visions of their Primarch's tragic death. It was a dual affliction, a twin torment. The red thirst, where battle awoke an insatiable hunger for the spilling of blood. And beyond it, darker still, the black rage, where warriors were consumed by the psychic echo of Sanguinius's last stand against the arch-traitor Horus. The archivist's quill trembled as the voices grew louder, recounting how entire brotherhoods had fallen to madness mid-battle, their eyes clouded with visions of wings and betrayal. The foes of the Imperium thought them berserkers, but the truth was far heavier. Every angel carried within his veins a fragment of his father's death. They were both blessed and broken. The chapter told of chaplains, black-armored shepherds of the fallen, whose task was grim beyond words. They did not merely preach or guide. They gathered the lost, the consumed, and hurled them into the crucible of war where their death might serve the Emperor one final time. Thus rose the Death Company, warriors clad in ebony, their armor daubed with red crosses. To stand among them was to fight alongside ghosts, men already dead, yet burning with unyielding fury. Whispers told of Baal's night skies, echoing with the howls of those taken by visions. Some fell before even earning their armor, aspirants broken by inherited grief. Others endured decades, only to succumb in a single instant as the curse clawed through their mind. The tome lingered on the question none dared speak aloud. Was this curse truly a flaw in their gene seed, or a wound burned into existence by Sanguinius's martyrdom? Did his death not only save mankind, but also doom his sons to eternal torment? The archivist's lantern flickered, shadows stretching long across the stone. He swore he felt wings brush past him in the dark, though none were there. A single line etched itself into the parchment in crimson script, not of his own hand. The sons of the angel bleed twice, once in battle and once in spirit. I woke the next morning with a strange heaviness in my chest. Sleep had been broken, restless, full of fragments of dreams I couldn't quite piece together. The lingering memory was a low whisper in the dark, a voice that felt like it was both inside and outside my head. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and tried to shake it off. But something about the air in the room felt charged, like static before a storm. Downstairs, the house was unusually quiet. Normally, I would hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of pipes, or the outside chatter of neighbors starting their day. But now there was silence. Heavy silence. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. The street was empty. Cars sat still, dew glistening on their roofs. No one was outside, not even the old man who always walked his dog at dawn. I brewed coffee to chase away the unease. The machine hissed and sputtered like it always did, but even the smell of it didn't ground me. I sat at the table with the steaming mug, staring at the blank wall. That's when I noticed it, carved faintly into the wood of the table. Something I had never seen before, words etched shallowly, as if with a blade. They hear you. My throat tightened. I ran my fingers across the carving. The letters were fresh, too fresh. Splinters clung to the edges. This wasn't old. Someone had been inside the house. The memory of the whisper in my dream returned, clearer now. It hadn't been a dream. Someone had been in my room. I pushed back from the table so suddenly the chair toppled over. My first instinct was to check the locks. Front door secure, back door latched, windows shut. I checked every room, opening closets, pulling back shower curtains, even looking under the bed like a paranoid child. Nothing. No one. But the carved message burned in my head. I considered calling the police again, but what would I even tell them? "Hello, officer," someone whispered to me in my sleep and carved a message in my table. They'd laugh, or worse, think I was losing my mind. I grabbed my phone instead and called Ben. His voice on the other end was groggy. "Man, it's not even 8. What's up?" "There's something wrong here," I said, pacing the living room. "Someone's been inside my house." "I can feel it. You said that last night." "No, listen." They carved something into my table. While I was sleeping, there was silence on the line. Then Ben sighed. "I'm coming over." While I waited, I couldn't sit still. I checked every corner of the house again, trying to convince myself I was just paranoid. But the message was real. I traced it again and again with my fingers, whispering the words aloud. "They hear you." Who was they? And why me? When Ben arrived, I nearly dragged him inside. I showed him the carving. He crouched down, ran his thumb across it, and frowned. "Fresh," he muttered. "You're not wrong about that. So I'm not crazy. Not about this, no." His attempt at humor didn't land. I stared at him, waiting for him to say something else. Look, maybe it's just some kids messing with you. Breaking in, pulling pranks. That happens, you know. Kids don't whisper in my ear while I sleep. That shut him up. We spent the rest of the morning combing through the house, checking for signs of forced entry. Nothing. Every lock was intact. No windows were broken. No footprints. No fingerprints. Nothing but that message. By noon, Ben left reluctantly, promising to check in later. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, trying to breathe. My house no longer felt like mine. It felt like something had claimed it, something invisible, watching me from the corners. That night, I resolved not to sleep. I brewed another pot of coffee, turned every light in the house on, and sat at the table with my laptop open. I tried to distract myself with mindless videos, but my eyes kept drifting to the carved words. The silence in the house was oppressive. Every creak of wood, every hum of the refrigerator felt amplified. Around 2 a.m, exhaustion hit hard. My eyelids drooped despite the coffee. I fought it, shaking my head, slapping my cheeks, standing up to pace. But sleep crept in anyway. I must have dozed off at the table, because when I opened my eyes again, the lights were out. All of them. The house was pitch black. My laptop screen was closed, though I never shut it. My pulse spiked. Slowly, I reached for my phone. The screen lit up, casting a faint glow. That's when I saw it. New words carved beneath the first, the wood shavings still fresh. They are closer now. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard it hurt. My phone slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor, the lights spinning across the walls. And in that split second of shifting light, I swore I saw movement, something darting past the doorway. I froze. The silence pressed in. Then faintly, almost inaudible, a whisper slithered through the air. "Don't look." The chamber of echoes trembled as the seal cracked open. A low hum filled the void, a sound too deep for mortal ears, yet every warrior present felt it gnawing at the edges of their sanity. The seal was never meant to break, never meant to see the light of this age. Inquisitor Seraphine raised her hand, her voice calm despite the gnashing sound pressing on all minds. "Hold formation. What we are about to face is not merely Xenos nor demon. It is something that remembers the old night." Behind her, the Black Templars formed a defensive ring, their bolters trained on the widening gap. Every breath seemed to thicken the air, as if the warp itself coiled around the chamber. Then came the light. It wasn't illumination, but the absence of shadow, a brilliance that pierced bone and thought alike. Out of the broken seal stepped a figure clad in silvered armor, inscribed with glyphs long before the Imperium's founding. Its form was humanoid, but stretched, perfected, impossibly precise. Its eyes burned with twin lances of gold. Captain Alaric spat an oath. Machine or demon, it matters not. It will fall. The entity tilted its head, as though considering the nights before it. When it spoke, its voice carried no sound, only the direct intrusion of meaning into their minds. We are the silent judgment. We are the first and last sentence. The chamber shook again as more figures stepped forward. Not one, not two, but 12 in total, each an echo of the first. Their weapons glowed with condensed void light, and their presence pulled reality taut, as if the universe itself strained against their arrival. Brother Garin muttered a prayer, his voice trembling. "By the throne, these are no Necrons, no Eldar. What have we unearthed?" Inquisitor Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "They are the ancients, the judges. My fears were correct. The Imperium was never meant to disturb this tomb. The silent judgment raised their weapons in unison. Energy arcs filled the air. And then, with a single step, they moved, not fast, not slow, but with inevitability, like the swing of a guillotine. Bolters roared. The Black Templars fired in disciplined volleys, explosive shells tearing into the glowing figures. Yet for every impact, the blasts dissolved into streams of harmless light. The silent judgment did not falter. Brother Sergeant Malric charged, chainsword screaming, his faith unshakable. He brought the blade down on one of the ancients. Sparks flew, but the weapon shattered in his hands. A spear of white fire pierced his chest, and Malric was nothing but ash on the wind. A ripple of horror passed through the squad, but not one faltered. They fought on, even as their faith was tested against the impossible. Inquisitor Seraphine drew a blade older than most worlds, a relic blade forged in secret by the Ordo Malleus. She whispered the binding words, and the sword burned with runes of banishment. She struck at the closest figure, and for the first time, one of the ancients faltered, its golden eyes dimming. The silent judgment recoiled. Their voices echoed together. Defiance recorded. Sentence, annihilation. The chamber erupted in light. Walls split, pillars cracked. The very seal itself shattered into dust. The Black Templars were thrown from their feet, yet they rose, defiant, battered, but unyielding. Captain Alaric roared over the din. Brothers, this is not the time for despair. We are the Emperor's wrath. If we are to fall, we fall as his sword. The squad surged forward. Power swords clashed against impossible weapons. Storm shields deflected arcs of Vichar. Annihilation. They bought moments, heartbeats, fractions of eternity. But each moment came at a price. One by one, brothers fell, their oaths ending in silence. Seraphine's blade struck true again, driving deep into another judge. Its body dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only a whisper. 2 remain of 13. The seal weakens. The stars will know silence once more. Her blood ran cold. The seal had held more than guardians. It held something deeper, something still trapped beneath the surface. If all 13 fell, something else would awaken. Alaric's helm cracked, his left arm scorched. Yet he pressed on. He parried, countered, drove his sword into a judge's chest, only for it to shatter like glass. The judge retaliated, hurling him across the chamber. He struck the wall and fell, unmoving. "Captain!" Garen cried, rushing forward. But before he could reach him, 3 judges converged, their weapons raised high. The chamber's light dimmed, as if the void itself held its breath. And then, another sound. A sound not of death, but of arrival. The drop pod struck the surface above like thunder. Reinforcements. The echoes carried through the cracks, a chorus of steel descending from orbit. The silent judgment paused. For the first time, their unity wavered. Inquisitor Seraphine's lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. The Emperor provides. But deep within her heart, she knew. Reinforcements or not, the breaking of the seal had only begun to reveal the true threat. The chamber shook again, not from battle, but from below. A second layer of the tomb was stirring. Something vast, something ancient, something that even the judges had been left behind to guard. The last of the 13 spoke alone, its voice like a closing verdict. The prisoner stirs. You will wish for silence. And from beneath the broken seal came the first rumble of chains breaking. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop. At first, I thought it was just work emails piling up. But when I finally grabbed it off the nightstand, I saw dozens of notifications from the HOA group chat. My stomach twisted before I even opened it. Residents, please be aware that my name is under review for multiple violations. We urge cooperation as the board finalizes enforcement steps. The message was pinned at the top by none other than Martin. Dozens of neighbors had commented beneath, some supportive, others piling on with complaints I'd never heard before. His backyard parties are too loud. His tree blocks sunlight to my garden. His guests park in front of my house. It felt like a smear campaign. I typed furiously, demanding proof, denying the nonsense. But Martin had muted me. He actually muted me from the neighborhood chat. I stared at the screen in disbelief. He had turned the whole community against me without giving me a chance to speak. I went outside to clear my head, only to notice something even more infuriating. A notice had been taped to my door. Final warning. Failure to comply will result in fines and further legal action. They hadn't even explained what the violation was this time. Just another vague threat designed to break me down. By now, I wasn't scared. I was angry. They wanted to corner me, to make me fold under pressure. But all it was doing was fueling me to push back harder. Later that day, while working in my yard, I caught Martin lurking again. He stood near the curb, pretending to check his mailbox, but his eyes kept darting toward me. Finally, I called him out. "Something you want, Martin?" I asked, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. He sauntered over with that smug grin plastered on his face. "Just making sure you got the notice. Don't make this harder on yourself. If you cooperate, maybe we can resolve this quietly." "Quietly?" I snapped. "You mean you get to harass me, make up lies, and I'm supposed to just roll over?" His grin faded. "You don't understand how this works. The board listens to me. The neighbors listen to me. You're outnumbered." I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "Maybe you should remember that intimidation is illegal. And maybe record yourself saying that next time. It'll sound great in court." For once, Martin didn't have a comeback. He muttered something under his breath and walked off. But I noticed the way his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't used to being challenged. That night, something strange happened. Around 11 p.m., I heard noises near my backyard fence again. This time, I grabbed my phone and recorded as I quietly moved closer. The sound of wood creaking, footsteps, then Martin's voice. "Yeah, this will do it. Once the board sees this mess, he won't have a chance." I peeked out and nearly lost it. Martin was actually tossing garbage bags over my fence. Plastic bottles, wrappers, even old food containers, trash he had collected, now dumped into my yard to frame me. I shouted, and he froze like a kid caught stealing candy. For a split second, we locked eyes. My phone camera pointed straight at him. Then he bolted, sprinting down the street and disappearing into the shadows. I stood there shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what he had just tried to pull. He was no longer just a nosy neighbor. He was actively breaking the law, trespassing, vandalizing, framing me. The next morning, I emailed the video to the HOA board, demanding action. Hours later, I received a single-line response. "We will review this matter internally." That was it. No acknowledgement, no concern, no promise of accountability. Just a brush-off. That's when I knew the board wasn't just tolerating Martin. They were protecting him. I started documenting everything more carefully. Dates, times, screenshots, video clips. If they thought they could isolate me, they were wrong. If anything, this was going to make my case stronger once I got the authorities involved. But what I didn't expect was what happened later that evening. I came home from running errands to find my front yard absolutely destroyed. Plants pulled up by the roots. My mailbox knocked over. Spray paint scrawled across my fence. Rule breaker. I stood frozen in my driveway, fury and disbelief churning in my chest. And then it hit me. This wasn't just Martin anymore. Someone else had joined in. Maybe a neighbor, maybe one of his lackeys from the board. The war had officially escalated, and I wasn't backing down. The morning after the emergency HOA meeting felt different, like the air in the neighborhood carried a new heaviness. I went out to water my lawn, trying to keep my routine steady, but I noticed curtains shifting in several houses. People were watching me, whispering, judging. The rumor mill had spun into overdrive after Karen's humiliation, and I knew the board wouldn't let the matter rest quietly. By noon, an envelope was taped to my front door. No mailman, no knock, just stuck there like a silent threat. I peeled it off and read the first line. Notice of continued non-compliance. Of course, they were doubling down. This time, the letter accused me of violating multiple bylaws simultaneously, unapproved, unauthorized alterations to my landscaping, failure to adhere to the community aesthetic, and now, absurdly, hosting disruptive gatherings because I had friends over last weekend for a cookout. It was so transparent I almost laughed, but anger swallowed the humor before it escaped. They weren't enforcing rules. They were manufacturing violations to punish me. I kept the letter, scanned it for evidence, and tucked it in my growing file. The HOA wanted war. Fine, but wars aren't fought with paper alone. That evening, as I sat on my porch, my neighbor Jeff walked over. He was a quiet guy, ex-military, kept to himself mostly. He leaned on the railing and lowered his voice. I don't know what's going on with the board, he said, but Karen's been knocking on doors all week, riling people up about you, telling folks you're trying to ruin property values, that you're refusing to follow the same rules as everyone else. Of course she is, I muttered. Jeff's eyes narrowed. She also said something about getting the board to approve community enforcement. The phrase chilled me. What does that mean? He shook his head. Sounds like they're planning to take matters into their own hands. I'd keep your cameras rolling if I were you. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every noise outside jolted me awake. At one point, around 2 a.m, I checked my security feed and saw 2 figures walking slowly past my house. They weren't just passing by. They stopped, stared at my yard, and then one of them pointed toward my tree. My tree, the one Karen wanted cut down. The following morning, I discovered deep scratches in the bark, like someone had taken a blade to it. It wasn't enough to kill the tree, but it was enough to send a message. I reported the vandalism to the police, though the officer who came out seemed reluctant to get involved. Without proof of who did it, he said, there's not much we can do. Just document everything and keep your footage. That was the problem. I checked the recordings, but whoever did it stayed just outside the range of my main camera. They knew exactly where the blind spots were. By the weekend, things escalated again. I received another letter, this one warning me of daily fines if I didn't remedy the violations within 72 hours. I showed the letter to a lawyer I'd been consulting, and he shook his head in disbelief. They're bluffing, he said, but they're trying to bury you in stress. Don't give in. I'll draft a formal response and demand that they cease harassment until the court date. I felt better knowing someone was in my corner, but the HOA wasn't slowing down. On Sunday afternoon, as I was grilling in the backyard, I heard shouting from the street. When I went out front, I saw Karen standing in the middle of the road, flanked by 2 other board members. They were holding clipboards, gesturing wildly toward my property, while a small crowd of neighbors gathered. "This," Karen barked, pointing at my tree, "is a direct violation of our community's bylaws." He refuses to listen. He thinks he's above the rules. Do we want someone like that bringing down our property values? Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but a few nodded along. Karen's voice rose higher, feeding off the attention. We gave him chance after chance. Now we need to decide. Do we let one man ignore the rules, or do we stand together for the good of our neighborhood? It was a public trial, orchestrated by Karen herself. I stepped onto my porch, holding up my phone, recording everything. "You don't get to hold kangaroo courts in the street," I called out. "You don't get to vandalize property and then act like you're protecting the neighborhood. Everyone here should know. I have evidence. Every letter, every threat, every manufactured violation. You're not protecting this community. You're abusing it." The crowd went silent. Some people looked at Karen, waiting for her to respond. Her face twisted, but she forced a laugh. "Evidence, please. No one believes your lies. You're the problem here, not us." But the way she said it, the shrill edge in her tone, betrayed her. Even the board members at her side looked uneasy. That night, just when I thought the situation couldn't get worse, my security system triggered an alert. Motion detected in the backyard. I opened the live feed and froze. 2 figures were inside my fence. One of them carried a saw. They were heading straight for my tree. The silence in the courtroom that morning was heavier than anything I'd felt before. By now, nearly the entire neighborhood had heard about the case. The entitled HOA officer, Leonard, had pushed his demands too far, and this was the day things would finally come to a head. The gallery was filled with homeowners, many of them whispering nervously, some glaring at him, others nodding in quiet support toward me. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Leonard had his smug look plastered across his face, like he believed the law itself bowed to his authority. But I could see the way his lawyer shuffled papers nervously. That tiny crack in their armor gave me confidence. The HOA's argument started simple enough. Leonard's lawyer claimed that my house being painted a color other than beige violated the Community Uniformity Clause. He brought up a stack of HOA documents, waving them as if they were holy scripture. The judge leaned forward, inspecting the wording, then asked a pointed question. When were these documents updated and distributed to the community? That was the first turning point. Leonard's lawyer hesitated. The documents were outdated, never officially filed with the county, and worse, homeowners had never received proper notice. The judge scribbled something down, and I caught Leonard stiffening in his chair. Then it was my turn. My lawyer, calm and methodical, presented evidence of harassment. Letters Leonard had shoved into my mailbox, pictures of him standing outside my property snapping photos at odd hours, even testimony from neighbors who had witnessed his behavior. As each piece was revealed, Leonard grew redder, gripping the armrests of his chair like he wanted to crush them. But the most damning moment came when my lawyer pulled out an email. One Leonard had carelessly sent to the entire HOA board. In it, he ranted about how my house was an eyesore and how he would make an example of me if it meant twisting every rule possible. Gasps spread through the courtroom. The judge's eyebrows rose sharply. Leonard shifted, muttering under his breath. When cross-examination began, my lawyer went for the throat. "Mister, Leonard, is it true you singled out my client's house, despite other homes in the neighborhood also not being painted beige? Leonard tried to dodge. That's different. Their houses were approved by me. The judge cut him off immediately. Approved by you? Are you suggesting you hold final authority above the HOA bylaws and community vote? Leonard stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I'm simply enforcing the vision of the neighborhood. The judge's pen scratched the paper again. My lawyer pressed harder. Is it true you entered my client's property without permission on multiple occasions? Leonard snapped, voice raised. If people won't follow the rules, sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands. That outburst was the nail in the coffin. The judge banged the gavel, reminding him to control himself. But the damage was done. The courtroom murmured, people shaking their heads, whispering about how unhinged he sounded. At that point, even Leonard's own lawyer looked like he regretted taking the case. The judge leaned back, silent for a long moment, then finally spoke. This court has seen enough evidence of harassment, overreach, and abuse of authority. While homeowners associations have rights, they do not supersede the rights of individual property owners. You, Mr. Leonard, have misused your position. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. Victory was within reach. But the judge wasn't finished. Therefore, I am dismissing the HOA's claims against the defendant. Furthermore, I am referring this matter for review of the HOA's leadership conduct. There may be grounds for civil penalties. The sound in the room shifted instantly. Some neighbors clapped quietly. Others leaned forward, whispering excitedly. Leonard's face drained of color, his lips trembling as if he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. But just as I thought it was over, Leonard did something no one expected. He shot up from his chair, slammed his fists on the table and shouted, "This is corruption. You'll all regret siding against me. I run this community, and no one gets away with defying me." The bailiff immediately moved towards him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Leonard jerked away, screaming about conspiracies and betrayal. The judge's gavel pounded as security stepped in. The gallery erupted. Some people stood, some shouted at Leonard. Others tried to calm the chaos. Through the noise, I caught sight of him glaring at me with pure hatred in his eyes, his finger stabbing the air in my direction. "This isn't over," he shouted as officers restrained him. "You'll see what happens when I take this into my own hands." The bailiff escorted him out, his voice still echoing through the chamber. My lawyer leaned close, whispering, "Don't relax yet. He's dangerous when cornered," and he was right. The judge adjourned the case, ruling firmly in my favor. On paper, I had won. But as I walked out of that courtroom surrounded by neighbors buzzing with talk, I couldn't shake the image of Leonard's face twisted in rage. He wasn't finished. He was humiliated, backed into a corner, and people like him don't go down quietly. Outside, a neighbor approached me. She looked shaken. "You should be careful," she whispered. "I've lived here a long time. Leonard doesn't take losses well. He'll try something." Her warning stuck with me the entire drive home. The legal battle was over, but the war, that was far from settled. That night, as I stood on my porch, I saw a shadow move near the end of my street. Too quick to catch clearly, but enough to send a chill crawling up my spine. And then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of something metallic scraping against my fence. I froze, my phone in hand, heart hammering. Leonard's voice from earlier replayed in my head. "You'll see what happens when I take this into my own hands." This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something darker. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint scratch of the judge's pen as she made notes. Karen sat across the aisle, her face tight with anger, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. I sat straight-backed, trying to keep my nerves hidden, though my palms were slick with sweat. Months of intimidation, harassment, threats, and humiliation had led here. Today was the day things would finally be decided. Karen had been trying for weeks to twist the narrative, portraying me as the unreasonable neighbor who defied community standards. She had even claimed my shed was a hazard, my gatherings disruptive, and my property an eyesore. Every exaggeration was laced with venom. But I had brought evidence, photos, letters, testimonies from neighbors, and even security footage of her trespassing. I wasn't going to let her lies win. The HOA board members sat stiffly behind her like obedient soldiers. Their loyalty wasn't surprising. Karen had always bullied her way into dominance, and they rarely opposed her. But I noticed some cracks forming. A few board members looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats whenever her lawyer spoke too forcefully. Maybe they had realized she'd gone too far. Maybe they knew siding with her could drag them all down. When my turn came to speak, I rose with the stack of papers in hand. My voice was steady, though inside I felt the weight of every eye in the room. "Your Honor," I began, "I am not here to cause trouble or undermine community rules. I am here because my neighbor, Karen, has weaponized the HOA to target me personally. She's demanded that I remove a shed that is fully compliant with city code, harassed me in front of my family, and spread false accusations in an attempt to control how I live on my own property." Karen snorted loudly, rolling her eyes. The judge glanced at her, unamused, before gesturing for me to continue. I placed the photos on the evidence table, clear images of my shed, neatly built and within the property line. Then I submitted letters from neighbors, many of whom had grown tired of Karen's bullying. One even wrote that Karen had threatened them for siding with me. The security footage sealed the narrative. Karen entering my yard uninvited, trying to measure my shed with a tape measure, and even banging on the walls of it in frustration. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming the footage was invasive, but the judge allowed it, her expression hardening. "This is direct evidence," she said. Karen's face flushed deep red. She muttered something under her breath, and her lawyer tugged on her sleeve, clearly worried she'd lose her composure in front of the court. Then came the testimonies. One by one, neighbors spoke up. Some were hesitant at first, nervous to be dragged into conflict, but the truth was undeniable. "We've all seen Karen targeting him," one said. "She's been making life miserable for anyone who doesn't fall in line." The tide in the courtroom shifted. I felt it. The atmosphere that once favored Karen began to crumble, replaced with something else: accountability. Even the HOA board members, once so confident in backing her, looked uneasy. When Karen was finally asked to speak, she launched into a tirade, her words dripping with entitlement. "This community has standards. He thinks he can just ignore the rules because he doesn't care about anyone else. He's selfish, disruptive, and his shed is a disgrace." Her voice cracked with rage, but instead of persuading the judge, her outburst revealed the truth. She wasn't concerned with fairness or order. She was obsessed with control. The judge leaned forward, her voice firm. "Miss Karen, this courtroom is not the place for emotional outbursts. Stick to the facts." Karen bit her lip, glaring at me as though she wished she could set me on fire with her stare. Finally, after hours of back and forth, The judge called for a recess before delivering her ruling. As people filed out, Karen stormed past me, hissing under her breath, "This isn't over." "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her threats were empty now, desperate. When the session resumed, the judge delivered her verdict. The shed in question is within legal compliance and does not violate city code. Furthermore, the court finds that Ms. Karen's repeated actions constitute harassment and abuse of her role within the HOA. Effective immediately, Ms. Karen is barred from further enforcement actions against the plaintiff. Additionally, the HOA board is ordered to undergo review for potential misuse of authority. The room erupted in whispers. Karen shot to her feet, her lawyer trying to pull her back down. She screamed, "You can't do this. I am the HOA." The judge's gavel slammed. "Order. One more outburst, and you will be held in contempt." Karen sat, shaking with fury, her face pale with shock. For the first time since this nightmare began, the power wasn't in her hands. It was slipping through her fingers like sand. As the hearing ended, I walked out into the cool air, my chest rising with relief. But before I reached my car, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see a supportive neighbor. Instead, it was Karen. Her face twisted with hatred, her voice a low growl. "You think you've won? This was just the beginning. You have no idea what I'm capable of." She leaned closer, her eyes wild. "Watch your back." And with that, she stormed off, leaving me frozen in place, the echo of her words burning in my mind. For the first time in this entire battle, I realized Karen wasn't done. She was only getting started. The courtroom atmosphere was thick with tension. I could feel the stares, the whispered judgments, the silent pressure building on my shoulders. Karen sat across the aisle, arms crossed, lips curled into that smug half-smile that made my blood boil. She looked like she had already won. She looked like she believed everyone in this room existed to bow down to her. The judge, a stern man with sharp eyes, cleared his throat. "We will hear the defense now." All eyes shifted to me and my attorney. My attorney rose, calm but commanding, and began outlining the ridiculousness of Karen's claims. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, "what we are dealing with here is not a matter of community preservation, but personal control. My client has been harassed, intimidated, and slandered, all because he chose to enjoy the use of his own property. The HOA bylaws Karen claims to cite do not, in fact, grant her the authority she pretends to wield. This case is nothing more than an abuse of power." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "Lies! Every word. He's destroying the neighborhood with his arrogance." The judge shot her a look that could have burned through steel. "Miss Karen, you will remain silent unless addressed." Her face twisted, but she pressed her lips shut. My lawyer continued, presenting photographs of my property, side by side with the actual HOA guidelines. Every violation she accused me of was completely fabricated. The audience in the gallery murmured as the evidence mounted against her. Even some of her supposed supporters looked uneasy now. I could see Karen's face tighten with every word. She shifted in her chair, her smugness melting into unease. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, who looked less and less enthusiastic about defending her crusade. Then came the witnesses. One by one, neighbors stepped forward. At first, I worried they'd side with her, afraid of retaliation. But to my surprise, most told the truth. "She's been harassing him for months," one neighbor said. "I've seen her on his property without permission. I've heard her threats." "She threatened me too," another admitted. "Said if I didn't support her complaint, she'd make life miserable for me. Gasps filled the room. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Is this true, Ms. Karen?" Karen shook her head violently. "They're all lying, every single one of them. He's turned them against me." But the cracks were showing. Finally, it was my turn. I stood, heart pounding but voice steady. "Your Honor, I never wanted a war with Karen. I just wanted to live in peace, to enjoy my home. But she wouldn't allow that. She trespassed into my yard. She filed false complaints. She spread lies to the neighborhood. And when none of it worked, she dragged me here. All because she couldn't control me." The judge leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Silence filled the courtroom. Then Karen erupted. She shot up from her chair, pointing at me with wild eyes. "He's dangerous. Don't you see? He's a threat to the community. If you don't stop him, no one will be safe." Her voice cracked. She was shaking. Spit flew from her lips as she ranted incoherently about conspiracies, about me being some kind of menace to society. People in the gallery stared, some covering their mouths in shock. The judge slammed his gavel. "Miss Karen, that is enough." But she didn't stop. She lunged forward, trying to reach me, shrieking like a mad woman. Her own lawyer grabbed her arm, trying to restrain her, but she fought like a cornered animal. Bailiffs rushed in, restraining her as she kicked and screamed. "He ruined everything. He ruined me. I'll make him pay." The courtroom descended into chaos. The judge shouted for order, the gallery buzzed with whispers, and Karen's screams echoed off the walls as she was dragged out of the room. My lawyer leaned toward me, whispering, "She just destroyed her own case." The judge's face was stone, but I could see the decision already forming in his eyes. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about control, abuse, and someone who had finally exposed herself as unhinged. As order was slowly restored, the judge turned to me. "Mister, your last name. Given what we've seen today, I will need time to deliberate, but rest assured, justice will be served." The gavel came down, signaling recess. The gallery emptied with murmurs and hushed conversations. Some people glanced at me with sympathy, others with admiration. For the first time in months, I felt the weight beginning to lift from my shoulders. But then, as I stepped out into the courthouse hallway, I froze. Karen was there. Somehow she had broken free from the bailiffs for just a moment. Her hair was wild, her eyes burning with rage, her face twisted into something inhuman. She hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "This isn't over. You'll regret ever crossing me." Before I could respond, the bailiffs dragged her away again, her screams echoing down the hallway. I stood there, shaken but resolute. This was far from finished. She wasn't going to let go. Not without one last fight, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go. The hearing was set for Friday morning at the county courthouse. For 3 weeks, I had been preparing with my attorney, Mr. Callahan, going over every piece of evidence, photos, text messages, HOA documents, even the video I'd managed to capture of Karen threatening me on my own lawn. My stomach churned every time I replayed her shrill voice on the recording, but my lawyer said it was a golden piece of evidence. "Judges don't like harassment," he assured me, "especially when it's this blatant." Still, I couldn't shake the nerves. What if the judge sided with her? What if all the legal jargon and HOA technicalities tipped things in her favor? I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was standing up to an entire board that seemed determined to crush me. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept pacing the living room, looking over my notes and trying to calm my thoughts. My wife put a hand on my shoulder. "You've done everything right. You followed the rules. Tomorrow, she's the one who'll have to explain herself. Her words gave me strength, but a pit of unease still sat heavy in my chest. The next morning, the courthouse lobby was buzzing with people. Karen arrived with 2 board members trailing behind her like guard dogs. She strutted in wearing a stiff beige suit, clutching a binder so thick I wondered if she'd stuffed it with blank paper just for show. When her eyes met mine, she smirked like she had already won. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, each with our lawyers. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, entered and called the case. This hearing concerns allegations of harassment, improper fines, and violations of homeowners' rights, she said. We will hear both sides. Karen's attorney went first. He launched into a dramatic speech about how I had willfully and repeatedly violated community guidelines, claiming that my tree, my shed, even my flower beds were eyesores that dragged down property values. He waved around copies of HOA regulations, his voice booming as though he were putting on a show for the jury. Except there was no jury, just the judge. When it was Karen's turn, she stood, shoulders back, chin lifted high. "Your Honor," she said, "this homeowner has been a constant disruption to our community. He refuses to comply with rules, disrespects authority, and fosters division among neighbors. We, the HOA, must enforce order for the greater good. If you allow him to defy us, then the entire structure of our neighborhood falls apart." Her words dripped with false conviction. She sounded less like a concerned neighbor and more like a dictator defending her throne. Then it was our turn. My lawyer rose calmly, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, the defense will show that my client has not broken a single rule outlined in the HOA covenants. Instead, the HOA, led by Ms. Karen, has engaged in targeted harassment, intimidation, and the issuance of unlawful fines. We will present evidence of this." He clicked a remote, and the screen behind the judge lit up with photos of my property. My lawn, neatly trimmed. My shed, painted to match the house. My tree, healthy and within boundaries. Every single element looked orderly, compliant, and undeniably within the rules. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Then came the video. On the speakers, her voice screeched, "If you don't cut this tree down, I'll make sure the HOA bleeds you dry with fines until you beg us for mercy." The courtroom went dead silent. Karen's face flushed beet red. She stammered, That was taken out of context." The judge raised an eyebrow. "It sounds rather clear to me, Miss Karen." My lawyer continued. He presented the pile of bogus fines I had received, pointing out discrepancies in dates, signatures, and even made up infractions like improper grass shade. He noted how none of my other neighbors had received such fines for the same supposed violations. Then I took the stand. My voice trembled at first, but as I spoke about the months of harassment, the threats, and the constant feeling of being watched, something inside me steadied. "I bought my home to live in peace," I said. "Instead, I've been bullied and treated like a criminal for simply taking care of my property. This isn't about rules, it's about control, and I won't be controlled." When I stepped down, I caught Karen's glare, sharp enough to cut glass. She looked like she wanted to leap across the room and silence me herself. The judge leaned back, folding her hands. "I've heard enough," she said. "This HOA, under Ms. Karen's leadership, has overstepped its authority. The fines against this homeowner are hereby voided. Furthermore, I am issuing an injunction against further harassment. If such behavior continues, legal consequences will follow." A hush fell over the room. Karen's jaw dropped. Your Honor, you don't understand. The judge cut her off. What I understand is that power can be abused, and that's exactly what happened here. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel struck. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. My wife squeezed my hand. My lawyer gave me a small, satisfied nod. But Karen, she wasn't finished. As people shuffled out of the courtroom, she stormed up to me, her face twisted with rage. You think you've won? This isn't over. I'll find another way. You'll regret this. Her voice was low, venomous, meant only for me to hear. And as she turned on her heel and marched out, I realized something chilling. Karen had just lost in court, but the battle in the neighborhood was far from over, because people like her didn't give up. They doubled down, and I knew in my gut that she was already plotting her next move. The courtroom was thick with tension. Every sound echoed, the shuffle of papers, the clearing of a throat, the squeak of a chair. My entitled neighbor Karen sat across from me, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, lips twisted into the kind of smirk only someone convinced of their own victory could wear. She dragged me here, convinced she could bully me into submission with the weight of the HOA and her false confidence. Her lawyer was smooth, almost smug, strutting up to the podium with a folder packed with what I knew were fabricated violations, photos, letters, claims that my property was lowering the neighborhood's value, that I had been non-compliant for months. The HOA board members who supported her sat like vultures, nodding along, waiting for the scraps of power she'd toss them when she won. But I had been preparing. I wasn't just here to defend myself. I was here to expose everything she had been scheming behind closed doors. My lawyer, a calm and sharp professional who had seen cases like this before, waited until Karen's side finished their dramatic performance. Then he stood, buttoning his suit jacket, and began his counter. Your Honor, he said smoothly, what you've just heard is a carefully constructed narrative built on half-truths and outright lies. But we're not here to play into theatrics. We're here for facts, and the facts show something very different. Karen shifted in her seat, that smirk faltering just slightly. My lawyer flipped open a binder, displaying documented proof of every communication I had kept. Emails, letters, HOA meeting transcripts, every demand Karen had made, every false claim she had filed, every time I had asked for clarification only to be ignored. One by one, he laid them out. The judge leaned forward, reading through the highlighted sections. Karen's lawyer tried to object, sputtering that this was irrelevant, that this wasn't the issue at hand, but the judge shut him down quickly. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. My lawyer introduced a witness, the HOA's own treasurer, someone Karen thought was firmly in her pocket, except she wasn't. She had been fed up with Karen's manipulation for months and had agreed to testify. When she took the stand, the truth poured out like a flood. She explained how Karen had been pushing personal vendettas under the guise of HOA violations, how she manipulated board votes, silenced dissent, and used HOA funds for things that conveniently benefited her own property. The room erupted into murmurs. Even the judge's eyebrows shot up at that last revelation. Karen's face turned crimson. She slammed her hands against the table. "This is all lies," she shrieked, voice cracking with desperation. "They're conspiring against me." The judge banged the gavel. "Control yourself, ma'am." But the damage was already done. My lawyer leaned in, calm as ever. "No one is conspiring against you, Karen. The only conspiracy here is the one you've been running against every neighbor who dared stand in your way." Her smirk was gone now, replaced with wide, panicked eyes. Her carefully built facade was collapsing piece by piece, and she couldn't stop it. The judge turned to her lawyer. "Do you have a response to these very serious allegations?" Her lawyer fumbled, papers slipping from his hands, stammering something about misunderstandings and interpretations of bylaws. It was weak, laughably weak. The gavel came down again. "I've heard enough for today. We'll recess until tomorrow morning. But let me be clear. The accusations raised today are not minor. If what I've heard holds true, this is more than just an HOA dispute. This borders on financial misconduct." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Karen froze, her jaw dropping. I stood silently, heart pounding, as Karen's world began to crumble in front of everyone. And I knew tomorrow would be the day everything truly unraveled for her. The HOA board sat in silence, their smug expressions finally cracking as the judge's words cut through the courtroom like a knife. "This is not a matter of aesthetics," the judge said firmly. "It is a matter of property rights. The defendant has every legal right to maintain his home as he sees fit, so long as it does not violate city codes." I could feel the tension in the room shift. Karen, who had been scribbling furiously in her little leather notebook throughout the hearing, suddenly froze. Her pen clattered to the table. For the first time since this entire feud began, she looked genuinely shaken. The judge continued. "The HOA has overstepped its authority. Forcing a homeowner to repaint their house simply because it does not align with arbitrary board preferences is beyond the scope of the governing documents." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. A few people in the audience, neighbors who had come out of curiosity, whispered in disbelief. I caught the eye of Mr. Dawson, the only board member who had ever shown me an ounce of sympathy. He gave me the slightest nod, as though silently admitting I was right all along. Karen, however, wasn't ready to give up. She shot out of her chair, her voice rising above the murmurs. "This is outrageous. This man has made a mockery of our community standards. Beige homes, beige trims, beige fences. That is the rule. That is what makes our neighborhood desirable." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Miss Jenkins, unless you can point me to a clause in the bylaws that explicitly requires beige, I suggest you refrain from further outbursts." The courtroom fell silent again. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She flipped desperately through the thick binder of HOA documents she'd brought, her fingers trembling. Page after page she searched, but the silence grew heavier with each second. Finally, the judge leaned back. "That's what I thought." Case dismissed, the gavel struck, and the sound was final. I exhaled, the weight of weeks of stress, threats, and sleepless nights lifting from my shoulders. I turned to leave, but not before catching Karen's glare. Her face was crimson, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with fury. This wasn't over, not for her. On the courthouse steps, a few neighbors approached me. Some congratulated me quietly, clearly relieved someone had finally stood up to the HOA. Others avoided eye contact, afraid to be seen taking sides. Then, as I reached my car, I heard the sharp click of heels behind me. Karen's voice sliced through the noise of the crowd. "Enjoy your little victory," she spat, her tone low and venomous. "You think you've won? You've just made yourself the most hated man in this neighborhood. And I promise you, one way or another, I'll make you pay." I didn't respond. I simply unlocked my car, got inside, and started the engine. But as I drove off, her words replayed in my mind, heavier with each repetition. I may have won in court, but Karen wasn't going to stop. If anything, this loss would only fuel her obsession. She wasn't just an entitled HOA board member anymore. She was out for revenge. And deep down, I knew she was planning something big. The courtroom was buzzing with tension, but I sat quietly at my table, my attorney flipping through her notes with practiced calm. Across the aisle, the HOA board looked restless, their smug confidence from weeks ago replaced with unease. Their lawyer whispered frantically, sliding papers across the desk, but I could see it in their faces. They weren't prepared for what was about to unfold. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. We all rose, then sat back down, the air thick with anticipation. My heart was pounding, not from fear but from the sheer gravity of this moment. Months of harassment, intimidation, and manipulation had led here. They thought they could bully me into submission, but they had underestimated just how far I was willing to go to defend myself and my home. The HOA's lawyer went first, standing with rehearsed confidence. He painted me as the difficult neighbor, the one who refused to comply with reasonable community standards, the one who caused unnecessary disruptions. He gestured toward the board, portraying them as patient volunteers who had simply tried to uphold order while I rebelled against authority. Some heads in the audience nodded, others frowned, but I didn't flinch. I knew the truth, and more importantly, I had the evidence. When it was my attorney's turn, she rose slowly, letting the silence linger before she spoke. Her voice was steady, deliberate, and sharp. "What the HOA has failed to disclose to this court," she began, "is that my client was subjected to months of targeted harassment, intimidation, and unlawful attempts to coerce compliance with rules that were selectively enforced." She walked forward, placing a thick binder on the judge's bench. Inside this binder are emails, recorded meetings, photographs, and signed statements from multiple neighbors who witnessed the harassment firsthand. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." One by one, my attorney laid out the case. The threatening notes left at my door, the fines issued without proper procedure, the attempts to smear my reputation in community newsletters, the board's failure to follow its own bylaws. Every piece of evidence was another nail in their coffin. The HOA lawyer tried to object, but the judge shut him down repeatedly. Each time he spoke, it only made him look more desperate. My attorney remained composed, letting the evidence speak for itself, and it spoke volumes. The final blow came when she called a surprise witness, my next-door neighbor, someone who had remained silent until now. He walked to the stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. His testimony was devastating. He recounted how the HOA president had openly admitted during a private conversation that they were going to make an example out of me to keep other homeowners in line. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward. "Is that so?" The witness nodded firmly. "Yes, Your Honor." They targeted him deliberately, not because of community standards, but because he challenged their authority. The HOA board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their lawyer whispered something, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge called for a recess, and as the room cleared, I caught the glare of the HOA president. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his confidence shattered. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the scales tipping fully in my favor. But just as I began to breathe easier, my attorney leaned in close. Her words were quiet, but they chilled me to my core. They're going to try something before the next hearing. I can feel it. Don't let your guard down, not even for a second. I froze, realizing the war with the HOA wasn't over yet. If anything, it was about to get more dangerous.